Okay, so I'm going to give a pretty simple talk. I don't think I'm going to say anything that you don't know already, but I'm going to try and make a bit of a pitch to go about model evaluation in CMIP7 a little bit differently to the way we've done it in the past. And these slides are written before the workshop agenda came out, so funnily enough, I've got a slide that starts like this, which is what we talked about for the whole of yesterday, but my take on it was a little bit different a week or so ago. And this is sort of a list in increasing order of ambition. And the first one is really what are we going to do? Are we just going to make a submission and get that done? And we don't really care about what it looks like. Are we going to try and actually avoid international shame and embarrassment and submit something that, it's okay? Are we actually going to try and make an independent contribution to the CMIP ensemble? Are we actually going to try and add a skillful contribution to the CMIP ensemble that adds, skill where other models don't have skill? And ultimately, we want something like that. And my point is that for all of those, apart from the first one, we need to have some kind of strategy for model evaluation to get us to get those things. And obviously, the further we go, the more important that's going to be. So it might not be obvious to everyone, but understanding model performance is really not very easy. To state the blinding obvious, we've only got historical observations. They're necessary but not sufficient to tell us whether we've got a good model for the future. And attributing, I'm going to focus a little bit on attributing a model observation mismatch to bits of the model and how hard that is. And just to point out that when we compare with observations, we're not really comparing with observations, we're comparing with observations that go into an observational model, get processed in various different ways. You might infer things from irradiances, you might have other models in there. It's not an apples for apples comparison. We may or may not have some kind of uncertainty estimate associated with that observational product. And then on the modelling side, we've obviously got internal variability that's completely out of sync with the observational side, for the CMIP case at least. There are equilibrium states involved that might be offset from the real world that we have to account for in terms of looking at change over time or something like that. We've got forcing uncertainties and model parameters. Same sort of story with uncertainty estimation. We might have some uncertainty estimation in the form of an ensemble, but that will only sample a particular part of the uncertainty space. And when we actually compare these two things, the internal variability and the timescales involved mean that we only really get to look at emergent behavior in some sense. And our capacity to attribute blame to a specific model component is pretty limited, actually. We can, we've got a few levers we pull and we try to get there, but it's quite a hard thing to do because we're not actually comparing things at the process level. And that's unavoidable, I think. Thinking about that a different way, because there's a piece of work that sort of framed this in a more general context, which I think is really important, and I've put it in the lowest level terminology I can get to. If you want to evaluate a process representation, but you can only evaluate it as part of a chain of processes using the end of the result of that chain. So I've got a whole lot of things that tie in together, and I can only look at what happens at the end. And I want to get inferential information about some part of that chain. It's really hard, right? Because if the answer's wrong, you don't know if the reason why it's wrong is the thing that you are interested in, the particular process you're interested in, or if it's some other part of that chain. And if it's right, you don't know whether it's right for the right reasons or your incorrect process is compensated for by something else, right? So we're all familiar with this kind of stuff. And all I want to do is give it a name because it exists in many different forms in the kind of stuff we do. And it's really important. Okay, and that obviously applies to things like, which is what I was getting at there, codependent model representations, which in the hydrology community they call equifinality, model observation product dependence, which tends to happen, something to do with the way we look at metrics and aggregations over time. So because of the metrics you're looking at, something can look really good when it's not really good. There's a whole lot of stuff like that. And the reason why the title is not there is because there was a really good paper that looked at this, and they called it confirmation holism, which just means your ability to confirm the model is to do with the holistic evaluation of the whole system. And I'm sure you've read the paper because it's in Studies in History and Philosophy of Modern Physics, which you will read, right? It's an awesome paper, though. I really recommend you go and read it. It's about climate models from a philosophical point of view and the problems of getting constraint on climate models when you're massively under constraint. Okay. So then we have something like this going on quite often as we finally get the model to run. And this example is not meant to reflect what actually happened, but just something about the process. We do a historical simulation. We compare with a particular variable. We don't like it. We adjust something. We compare with a different variable. We don't like it. We adjust something. We compare with that same one again because it still looks bad. We try something else. Then we go to a different variable, try something else again. and then we go to a different product for the same variable and realize it's entirely different, and go again. And all I want to point is the number of arrows going back to rerunning this is a lot. And we can do a little bit better than that, I think. Just to say that piecemeal evaluation can be really inefficient, it can be really costly, and it can achieve relatively little over a long period of time. So can we avoid or address this? I think fundamentally, I just want to make the point that we're evaluating and diagnosing a modelling system that's fundamentally under constrained, and we're never going to get away from that. So what can we do to address that problem? I think the answers are kind of obvious if you think about it, but they're hard. We've got to look at the widest range of relevant variables where we have some observational constraint. We've got to look at the widest range of relevant observational products. We've got to look at utilise uncertainty estimates, and I'd question the meaning of observational model mismatch if there is no uncertainty estimate. It might not mean anything. And utilise things like budget closure information for constraint, and there are lots of different budgets to look at. But that's obviously hugely time consuming, and we're under-resourced. But luckily, someone else has done it. Okay, lots of groups have done it, and they've made it publicly available. And so the pitch here is really just to utilise what other groups have done to help us solve this problem, rather than do what most people have done historically and just, let's have a look at precip, let's have a look at temperature. Now let's change the model again to get those right, rather than saying, okay, where are the red flags? What is the comprehensive picture that's coming out of these 14 red flags together, collectively? What is the more informed decision about what we're going to try and change? Okay. So there are lots of different tools. Ian already mentioned ILAM. That's ILAM on the left, but that's actually an ocean model evaluation through ILAM for the CMIP models. So ILAM does ocean as well as land stuff. There's the PCMDI metrics package. There's ESM-Val tool. I was really excited to see that the NRI might be supporting the ESM-Val tool. There's LVT for the LIST framework. There's modelevaluation.org. And there's this new emerging effort out of the US to actually put a few of these things together in one framework, so you can actually send model output to this one framework and utilize a whole lot of these packages together. And that effort is called CMIP7. Okay, so that's one thing. These standardized evaluation packages that look at many, many data sets over many, many different variables. And if you actually, there's obviously a bump getting the whole thing up and running, but once you get it up and running, you've got a simulation, you get a feedback across a huge number of areas. The other thing that I think is really important that we haven't really paid much attention to is unit testing. So if you develop software, you develop tests for each little component of what you're building as you build it, just to check you don't break anything. And if you're anything like me when you're coding, we're really good at breaking stuff, okay? So the closer we can come to testing the individual little bits of the process representations, the less likely that confirmation holism thing becomes an issue. So we're all perfectly capable of breaking stuff without being aware of it. And that might be a break that breaks everything, so you will be aware of it, but that also might be somehow sabotaging something in a way you didn't realize, where I'm working on some part of the water cycle, or the water cycle stuff looks really good, but I've nudged something else out of the way, and something that I don't care about has now been broken and I don't really know. But if I've got this kind of evaluation suite in front of me, the flags will be raised. So standardized routine synthetic tests could actually identify when we break stuff. They could look like conservation tests, they could look like boundary cases, they could look like tests for non-physical things going on, discontinuities, extreme responses, and they can be something, you know, some people even build this into the code while the code runs and tell it to crash if something goes wrong, but that's not the best way to do it. The best way to do it is when you check into a repository or something like that, these tests just run very quickly, they're very quick, they throw some boundary cases at it, it all seems okay. Likely to be very model specific though, something we need to build for each model. Okay, the last thing I want to make a pitch for, and this is sort of the controversial thing, is building the testing environment before we try and build the modeling system. In software design and engineering and a whole lot of other places, you have to specify what the requirements are and the testing environment before you're allowed to start to build something. It sets the benchmarks, or at very least the metrics of evaluation a priori, and there are a whole lot of good reasons for doing this. And in those environments, if you were to build something, run it, evaluate it, and then say the standard is whatever I've built, you'd probably lose your job. And those are people who are professional builders of stuff, right? So we can get a lot better at this, and it won't cost us anything, it will actually save us time. It will let us know about model issues as early as possible, not after tuning, not after we've coupled other things in. So Martin was saying we're really lucky with the last round of CMIP. We can ensure that we're going to be lucky. We don't even need to be lucky if we test early, and any red flags that are going to come up are there immediately because we've put the testing framework in place. It gives us a comprehensive understanding of strengths and weaknesses, and I would argue we could be better as a community at putting on the table all of the things we know about our model rather than falling for that innate human ability to just say, oh, look, it looks really good at doing this and this and this, and I've heard it doesn't do that very well. I don't want to know about it. Okay. And it obviously allows us more time to be devoted to issue resolution, which is what we want to do. So my point is that not using an evaluation, a comprehensive evaluation suite is inherently risky, in my opinion, and that using it actually should save us time in the medium to long term. And that's all I'm going to say, other than, okay, one more. Why bother? In a self-interested sense, I think it's really likely that something like ESM Val Tool will run automatically on CMIP7 submissions and be posted to the web as you submit them. That was going to happen for CMIP6. I was in a meeting with Veronica and other people where they thought they had the infrastructure to do that. It didn't happen in CMIP6. I'm pretty sure it's going to happen for CMIP7. Shane?
It can happen now. By the end of it, they can run and generate all the figures from at least chapter 3.
But I think if you don't know what that's going to look like, and you haven't done that test on your own model, and then you submit your results, you could be in for a shock and a lot more time spent. And obviously, if you sell misleading information, you might be sued or lose credibility. Just to say that lots and lots of money, increasing amounts of money, and it's going to depend on what we do, and it might matter even more than that. And that's all. Thanks, Kelsey.
Thanks, Gab.